Welcome to the Kathleen Project, capturing Manchester's industrial past. The voices you will hear in this series will tell of their experience working in Manchester's 20th century garment industry. In this episode, Christine will tell of her time working as a piece worker, making shirts and coat linings in the early 1960s.
I left school at 15 and the only thing I could write was my name. So I was told by the career officer that the only thing I was fit for was to go into the rag trade. So 3 of us got a job at a factory near Victoria bus station on the top floor of a 4-storey building, of which we were never allowed to use the lift. And we had to start at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it was making shirts. And you were just put in front of a sewing machine and somebody would show you basically what you had to do, and then you got on with it. And I earned £3, 10 shillings a week. Most of it went to my mother and the other went to bus fares to get there and back. But I loved it. I loved it because of the community that was built up by working in a factory. It wasn't very big, it was just a top floor. I think I must have spent about a year there, and then unfortunately he went bankrupt and I moved to Lower Broughton, where there were loads of factories, and I went making men's overcoats, and I did the linings for the overcoats. You had to put the whole lining together, every bit of it, sleeves, everything. And nobody actually showed you, you just kind of like was given a bundle and then you had to work it out. There was no pinning, no measuring. You had to make sure that the top bit and the bottom bit all were exactly right. They did have notches in, so you could follow the notches, and you had to make sure that your seams were all the same. There was no lines, no nothing. You just had to follow your foot, and you had to be perfect because your name would be on it, and they were all examined. It was, the floor that I worked on was huge, so there must have been at least 50 women working the machines. And the one thing you had to learn very fast was how to mend your sewing machine, because they would only have one engineer and you'd have to wait for him to come and look at your sewing machine. So you had to learn very quick on how to take bits of it apart underneath, get bunches of cotton out and things like that. So otherwise you were losing money. So, you learn very fast on how to do these little bits and pieces.
So what was a kind of typical target? Can you remember? Like, did you have to make a certain amount by the end of the day? Or
no, you didn't. It was entirely up to you. You would get a bundle, a huge bundle, and it depended on how many were put in a bundle. It wasn't necessarily the same amount. So you'd have to put down and then how many was in the bundle, and then it was up to you on how fast you were. And then sometimes you would go and there'd be nothing there. So then you were losing money because you'd have to wait until the cutters had cut it and then they would send it down. So it was up to you to how fast you were on the sewing machine.
And were you paid by pieces that you made, or was it just a flat rate regardless of what you made?
It was more or less a flat rate. You would put down the hour that it would take you to do each bundle so that they knew what you were doing. So you would put down each bundle that you had done, when it started and when you finished it, and you had a book, and it was up to you to write into the book what you'd done, and then at the end of the week they would tally that up and then you would get paid. And I can't remember what the hourly rate was. It wasn't a lot. If I came out with £10, £11, that was about your limit, and that was a lot then.
Was that for all the factories, or was that?
Yeah, it was basically the same, because they were all next door to each other, so no one was going to do different ththings. They would all try to keep it on an even keel. The quicker you were, the more money you earned, and if your sewing machine worked. These were big industrial sewing machines. They weren't your little things. They were big, heavy things. And you always had your own. You never moved about. You always, unless one came empty and you fancied sitting there, you would say, "Can I change?" and sit on that one, But other than that, you didn't. You stayed where you were. And then I moved from one factory to another. You could just go from one to the other, and I just moved to next door, and went in and said, "Have you got a job?" And they said, "Yes." "Well, can you start?" I said, "Tomorrow." And they went, "Fine." And I made ladies' Macs there, and I did the same again. I did linings. That was a bigger place, very, very noisy, if you can imagine all these machines going at the same time at full speed, and all the dust from all the cotton fibres from the fabric and things. So yes, it was very, very dusty and very noisy. And also you had to remember that underneath you were all these steam presses, so you had all that heat coming up as well. In the winter it was great. In the summer it was hard in the summer. And there were so many women in a room, you didn't necessarily know most of them. You only knew the little area that you were actually in, because you didn't venture out of that area because you were too busy.
So you said you started at 15. What was the kind of the age range of the women in the room?
Oh, a lot older. Yes, because most of them had been there most of their lives. In the first one I went to, had gone into there and stayed there. I was 15, so most of them, 20, 30, 40 years old. Well, to me at 15, that's old. And then as you went to the other one, again, there was some young people there, but not only a lot of them were older women, because that's what they did. And they stayed there, because it was comfortable, and they knew everybody, and they knew what they were doing, and they knew the way around places within the factory. So you would find that people would stay. They did mother you, and it was you felt secure there. And we all worked extremely hard, and everybody smoked. Everybody smoked. And not only did you smoke, but you'd always have a cigarette hanging on the side of your... I mean, the fire regulations were non-existent. And I smoked in them days, but very, very little. I didn't, I couldn't afford it. So all the machines had burn marks all along the edge of the machine where you would have your cigarette. I mean, eventually they did stop that, But it meant that because you smoked, it stopped you from going out for a cigarette, or going into another room for a cigarette. So you were still constantly working. How we never had a fire with all the bits on the floor and everything. I mean, cleaners used to come in and sweep up, but I mean, it was a disaster waiting to happen.
In terms of work hours, what was your start-finish time?
It was usually about 8 till 5. So there were long days, and you got an hour for dinner. You got a 15-minute break sometime in the morning where you could go and get a coffee. But most people would just go and get a drink and then put it at the machine and work through it. And then we would get an hour for lunch, and then you would work through till 5 o'clock.
And was the lunch, is that something that you brought in, or did they provide that for you? Did you pay for it?
Oh no, you had to pay for it. If you most of the time I would take something in, but sometimes you would go. They had a canteen where it was a fresh hot meal cooked every day. Yeah, it was. Yeah, all the factories had that. But it was great to work in these places because, when you hear people had a sing-along and things like that, we all did that, I would love to go into a factory now and see what it was like in a factory now, to see what they do. Because that atmosphere was when I look back at it now, it was actually overwhelming. It was amazing to be in that environment, even though it was hard. You never felt that you didn't want to go to work because you had that friendship and that community. It wasn't just a factory, it was a community.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Kathleen Project. The project is brought to you by Stitched Up and supported by Historic England. For more information, please contact Stitched Up at hello@stitchedup.coop or on Instagram or Facebook @stitchedupcoop.